to denounce the towns where the text says where he had done so many of his miracles. And so we're at a place right now where so many of the miracles, the miracles of Christ were really concentrated in the area that you're standing on now, and that we're going to be in the next couple of days, today and tomorrow. And so Jesus began to denounce these villages and these towns because so many of his miracles were done here. And he specifically mentions this town right here. I'm just going to begin reading at verse 20. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns where he had done so many of his miracles because they hadn't repented of their sins and turned to God. What sorrow awaits you, Chorazin and Bethsaida? For if the miracles that I did in you have been done in wicked Tyre and Sidon, their people would have repented of their sins long ago, clothing themselves in burlap and throwing ashes on their heads to show their remorse. I tell you, Tyre and Sidon will be better off on the judgment day than you. And then he says the same thing about Capernaum. So many miracles. When you think about the life and ministry of Christ, well, this was the epicenter of his ministry. And you talk about the stubborn heart of unbelief. Ryan and I at lunch yesterday, we were talking about it, and from kind of a scientific perspective and evolutionary perspective and things like that, where things seem so crystal clear, and people go, scratch their heads and go, how can you not see that? It is incredible how unbelief can be, how stubborn it can be. And nothing really reflects that so much as places like this. I mean, Jesus was here doing miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. And people just stood and they looked at it and they turned the other way. And so this is a significant place in the life and ministry of Christ, and really significant in the wrong way because of the unbelief, and we're reminded of the power of unbelief here. A couple of things else I want to point out. Let me expand a little bit. He mentioned the housing. You see those kind of like lattice work there, and then the arches? Those were two ways. We're standing in, by the way, a residential complex. Right here where we're standing, and right over there. This is where people live. And this basalt stone, this black basalt, as Saeed told us yesterday when we were at Megiddo, it's a really, really, really hard stone. But not only is it really, really hard, it's really, really brittle. And because of that, it really can't be quarried in lengths much bigger than 6 feet. And so, if you have rooms that are very wide at all, and they're covered with these basalt beams, they're going to have, it can't go much more than 6 feet. And so what they did in order to create larger rooms, you can see how close those are together. There were two ways that they expanded the size of the room. One was through arches, and they would be at 6 foot distances to make bigger rooms. And one was through that type of stone lattice work called fenestration. And what that would do is kind of allow air and light to circulate through rooms and make them a little bit bigger. So that's what you're looking at there. Those were done to expand the size of rooms. But I want to point out a couple of things that I think are really significant where we're at. Someone said a minute ago, I said, well, this is a house. And they go, wow, it's a really big house. Actually, it's a courtyard that we're standing in of a home. This was typical of the way people lived in the time of Jesus. And what we're looking at here is basically where an extended family would live. I remember the first time I was over here in about 1992, and I asked somebody, I said, so have you lived here in Nazareth all your life? It was somebody from Nazareth. And he kind of chuckled at me, and he explained, and I know it's different for a lot of people over here, but he was explaining, we kind of have the mindset, as you know, in America, you get up, you move anywhere. I mean, you move to California, you move to Maine. I've lived in South Dakota, I've lived in North Indiana, I've lived in East Tennessee. Just, hey, wherever life and circumstances take you. Well, and we kind of think sometimes, well, that's how it's always been in every time and every place. Well, no, that's not how it's always been. And it certainly wasn't that way in the first century. And so they lived in these complexes that, extended family. And most of the daily life took place in this courtyard. Now, why would most of the time be spent in this courtyard, do you think? Because what you see off the side around the courtyards are individual rooms. And what do you think might bring people out of those rooms into the courtyard most of the day, besides work? But why wouldn't they stay in the rooms? hot and dark. They didn't have windows. There's a wall that surrounds this insula, this apartment type lodging, this extended family dwelling. And that was for security reasons, obviously. But because of that, you didn't have windows. You didn't get up and you opened blinds and things like that. It was just really, really dark. And the rooms were pretty much where you slept. Now, let me tell you how, as Jesus is teaching, the people who lived here, they would understand him in different ways than we do. In John chapter 14, which is a text that we are so familiar with and we really love, I don't think there's hardly a funeral goes by that I don't read John chapter 14. Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms, he says. Back in the old day, you know what the old King James said? In my Father's house there are many mansions. And when someone started suggesting that that's really not an accurate translation, it means dwelling places, it means rooms. A lot of Americans, they got upset with that. They go, you can have your room if you want. I want my mansion. And they're just thinking so Westernly and so Americanized. The listeners of Jesus, they weren't offended by that. They didn't understand anything of it. They knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. Because typically, here's what happened in the first century. Someone, I'd fall in love with Leola, and we would decide I would, want to marry her, and the families would arrange it. And I basically would say to her, I'm going away from you for a while. And when I return, I will take you to myself. I will bring you home. And so I would leave her, and what I would do is I would return to my family home, and we would add a room, and it would become our room, and it would become our place, and we'd become a part of the family. And in that family relationship, there's great intimacy. I mean, the people of Jesus' day could identify with that. And, Americans, I don't want fellowship with that. I want my mansion. You can live somewhere else. They didn't have it. It wasn't that way. And this reflected deep love, deep communion, deep fellowship, and deep intimacy. And so I'd go away and prepare a place for Leola. And when I prepared a place, I would come and receive her to myself so that she could always be with me and that we could always be together with this incredible intensity of communion and fellowship and oneness as a family. Well, that's what the image, that's the backdrop of what Jesus is saying here. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If this were not so, I would have told you. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And when everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. You know the way that I'm going. And so Jesus is using that imagery, and it's really, really powerful imagery. And now hopefully when you hear that read, or when you read it yourself in John chapter 14, you'll think back to this place, and you'll really understand what Jesus is saying here. I want you to be a part of my family. I want you to come and live with me forever. I want you to experience the fellowship and the love of family throughout all of eternity. So I think this illuminates John chapter 14 and what Jesus was saying. A couple of other things really quickly that I'm reminded of when I come here, that being here and kind of laying your eyeballs on this really helps illuminate our places like Luke chapter 15. And in Luke chapter 15, of course, we're talking about the parable of the lost sheep and then the parable of the lost coin. And in verse 8 of Luke chapter 15, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me because I found my lost coin. In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. When you think about and when you kind of envision what they're talking about, she lights a lamp and she searches carefully. Look at the floors. I mean, can you see a little coin being lost in here? Yeah, I mean, there are so many nooks, there are so many crannies, And then when you remember that these rooms that people lived in, there were no windows again. It was black basalt walls, black basalt ceiling beams. It was just pitch black. You know, I know your house is the same as mine. I usually don't have to turn on a light during the day. It's like you turn on a light, you go, man, why am I wasting electricity? I don't need that. The house is flooded with light. Well, it wasn't that way in Jesus' day. Everything was in darkness in these rooms. And so he's using these images. This was everyday life. That they would have to light a lamp to illuminate their surroundings and then very carefully sweep through all of them to look for these precious coins that could so easily be lost in this. And so then the last thing that I'm reminded of course, is Matthew chapter 5, and that is the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talks about what we're supposed to be. And we'll be talking about a little bit more about the Sermon on the Mount when we get to the Mount of Beatitudes. But of course, in Matthew chapter 5, as Jesus is talking about his expectations for us, he says, no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, the lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to the entire house. Okay, think about, first of all, one little light, an oil lamp. What do you mean it gives light to the entire house? How can that be? Well, look at the rooms that they lived in. And it's all dark anyway. One light would illuminate that. And you also get the understand the significance of what we're supposed to be. Again, we live in houses where you turn on a light, it doesn't make a lot of difference. They understood what he was talking about. That light makes all the difference in the world. It lights up everything. And so when Jesus is telling them, you set a lamp on a stand to illuminate the whole house, that's the kind of difference I expect you to make in your life. People are to see it, and you're to illuminate everything around you. He's not interested in secret disciples. And so again, when I come here and see the living arrangements here, and see these images that Jesus uses, I think it really illuminates those texts. All right, Saeed, it's all yours.